Hi everyone, and welcome to Chapter Book Storytime. I'm Ellen from EVPL Oakland, and on this week's edition of the Variety Pack, I have a new book in one of my favorite series of all times. It's called The Labors of Hercules Beal by Gary D. Schmidt. Now, this really isn't a series, for example, like Harry Potter, where it's called the Harry Potter series and there are individual books. These are more companion novels. There's really not a name to the series, but a lot of the same characters drift in and out of these books, and not all of them at the same time, but you kind of get an idea of what's going on in their lives since the last time you read about them, and the things that happen in these stories are just wonderful. I really love these books. It started out with The Wednesday Wars, which is my favorite book of all time. I really love this book. And then there's a book called Okay for Now, and then Just Like That, and now Hercules Beal. And this story, The Labors of Hercules Beal, takes place many, many years after Just Like That. In fact, one of the characters from the earlier novels is now an adult in this, and so you get to see how he turned out, which is a lot of fun to think about. So, The Labors of Hercules Beal. Hercules, to start out, he's telling the story. He has some things he wants to set straight with you. Chapter 1. Some things I need to tell you here at the beginning to get them out of the way. Everyone has stuff to get out of the way, right? So, here's the first thing. My name is Hercules Beal. I know, it's a stupid name. It was an especially stupid name until this year, when I got my Beal family growth spurt. Before that, I was the kid who always got put in front of the class picture because otherwise I'd disappear behind kids like Ty Malcolm, whose grandfather played defensive end in the NFL before he became a minister at the Second Baptist Church of New Bedford and passed all his ginormous genes down to Ty. And I was the kid who always got cast as the cute little animal in every school play, like stupid Toto in our third grade performance of The Stupid Wizard of Oz. You can't believe how long it took before Ty Malcolm stopped calling me Toto. So, it's a stupid name. I get it, but I didn't choose it, so don't blame me. Blame my parents. Or don't, really. It's not even your business. And just so you know, even Achilles, that's his older brother, says that my growth spurt has finally started, like it happened for him when he was 12 too. All right? Here's the second thing. This fall, I'm going to the Cape Cod Academy for Environmental Sciences instead of Truro Middle School, which is bad enough. But what's worse is that my teacher will be a retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel. In his summer welcome letter, which you can bet he wrote only because some principal told him to, he said he hasn't had any friends since junior high, so we shouldn't expect him to be our friend either. What we should expect is that he's going to be a super tough teacher who doesn't take any crap. I'll say it again. That was his welcome letter. Oh boy, oh boy. Here's the third thing to tell you, even though it happened more than a year ago. Almost a year and a half ago. It's about parents. Hercules, the myth's parents, were Zeus, he was strong like my dad, who could lift mature maples into a pickup by himself, and Alcmene, who was beautiful and wise and who had dark eyes, like my mom. Those were Hercules' parents. I don't have any. Well, now I mean. Now I live with my brother Achilles, who had to come back from his stupid Washington, D.C. apartment to live with me after the accident, so we could keep the Beal brothers' farm and nursery going, even though he had to give up what he says was the best job in the whole freaking world, because he used to travel the whole freaking world writing stories for Smithsonian Magazine and National Geographic. The stories, by the way, are the part in those magazines that nobody buys the magazine because of. He probably thinks that living back in Truro, Cape Cod, after living in Brussels and Sydney and Beijing and Barcelona and New Delhi and Cairo and Johannesburg is like dying a little every day. Which it isn't, the jerk face. I get that Truro may not be a town you've ever heard of. Tourists stick around Hyannis and Chatham and places where stupid gift shops live. Or if they want to go up to the end of the Cape, they drive to Provincetown and skip right through Truro without even looking, probably because there aren't any gift shops in Truro. But what the tourists don't know, and what my brother probably doesn't remember, is that Truro is the most beautiful place on the planet. I know this is true. Here's the fourth thing to tell you, and I'm telling you this one so you don't think I whine about everything like my brother says I do. I have a wicked cool dog. And she came to me like this gift from who knows where. Maybe it's because it's been a pretty lousy year and a half since the accident, and the universe owes me one. Last spring, I asked Achilles about getting a pet, and he said he'd think about it, and I said, how long would it take to think about it? And he said, until after we got our vegetable garden planted. And I said, we didn't have a vegetable garden, and he said, now you're catching on. Oh boy, oh boy. So we turned a whole plot over behind the south greenhouse, and it was a lot of turning over, and we added a whole lot of manure, which you can probably imagine was no fun. And then my brother planted summer squash and Brussels sprouts and purple cabbage. It would save on groceries, Achilles said, and be healthy for us too. Double, oh boy, oh boy. So on the first day after 6th grade graduation, when our vegetable garden was all planted, I asked my brother if we could get a border collie, because border collies are smart and good and true and blue. And it wasn't like I was a kid anymore, since I was now officially in middle school. Achilles looked up at me from behind the desk in the front building of the Beal Brothers Farm and Nursery, a pen in one hand and the other hand on top of a pile of forms and bills. He looked at me like I was a complete idiot. I said a pet, not a whole dog. That's the pet I want. Do you know how much a border collie costs? He said. Well, maybe we could find one in a shelter. A border collie is expensive. His license would be expensive. His food would be expensive. His vet bills would be really expensive. Do you know how much one heartworm pill costs? $25 every month. And who's going to take care of him while you're at school and I'm at the farm and nursery? Well, he can stay at the farm and nursery with... No, he can't. My brother put down his pen. How about a rabbit? But then a miracle. And it all happened because this summer, my brother fell in love with a vampire. You think I'm making this up, the vampire part, but I'm not. She is definitely a vampire. Her name is Viola, already kind of a hint. And she wears only black except for her bright red lipstick, which she probably wears to hide what happens to her lips when she's low on human blood. She has long black hair and long black fingernails and black toenails and sort of like a bird of prey. Or maybe like that bat she can probably turn into. And I have never, ever, not once, not ever, seen any sunlight touch her. That's the biggest clue of all. Viola the vampire had been hanging around my brother, and yes, that's a pun, hanging around, for a couple of weeks when they came down to the shore to walk the beach and swim behind the Beal Brothers Farm and Nursery. Ellie and I were on a blanket playing cribbage. Viola the vampire was holding a huge black umbrella so the daylight would never touch her. What a surprise. What are you two doing? Said Achilles. Putting on a stage musical, I said. I thought we'd call it Nosferatu. You guys want to help? We're trying to figure out who would play the lead. My brother stood next to me and leaned down really close. It must be kind of hard to be in 6th grade and still be a total jerk, he said. I'm going to be in 7th grade, I said, and really, it's not so hard to be a jerk. I mean, look at you. My brother slipped a towel around from his neck, twirled it into a snake, and pulled it back to take off a strip of my skin somewhere when, and you have to believe me, because I'm not making this up, this dog, this amazing, beautiful, brown-haired, amber-eyed, big-eared mud of a dog came out of from who knows where, maybe the sea, and stood between us, her beautiful brown and white tail stiff at attention. She perched high on her toes, and the hair on her neck rose, and she leaned down low and stared up at my brother. She might have growled, but if she did, it was pretty quiet. I'm not making this up. I'm not. I really think she might have come out of the sea. Honey pie, said Viola the vampire. Honey pie, I said to my brother. She calls you honey pie? Shut up, said Achilles. The dog kept staring at my brother, and then she growled like she meant it. This time we all heard it. Viola the vampire took a step toward my brother, who took a step back toward her. "Looks like you have a bodyguard," said my brother. "Looks like," I said. I put my hand on the dog's shoulder. It felt perfect. "You keep up with this and you're going to need it." "Keep up with what?" I said. He looked at my dog. "You're going to have to find out who she belongs to." "Okay." "You're going to have to call the shelter and see if anyone—" "I get it, if no one is missing her." He looked at my dog again, and then he nodded. "Okay, Hercules, okay. If no one claims her, you got your dog. But you're going to have to work afternoons to—" "I get that too. And even if she looks nasty at me, or Viola, or a single customer, or—" "I'll make sure she never ever looks nasty at Viola or any of the customers." Achilles' eyes closed to slits, probably because of the sunlight, since maybe Viola had already bitten him and he might be slowly turning into what she was. He looped the towel back around his neck and turned to walk down the shoreline. Viola the vampire followed him. But my dog, my wonderful, amazing, perfect dog, came down from her perched toes, let the hair on her neck smooth out, turned to me, and grinned. Really? Then she dropped onto the edge of our blanket, put her head on her paws, looked at me once, looked at Ellie once, and fell asleep. "I think I have a dog," I said. Ellie stroked the soft fur on the back of her neck. "Her name's Mindy," she said. And that's how Mindy came into our lives. That was the part of summer that did not stink. And so now you know everything you need to know about Hercules Beal, his family, and his cool dog Mindy. As he said in the beginning, he's going to be going to a new school, the Cape Cod Academy for Environmental Sciences. He's not too happy about it. He'd rather go to the Truro Middle School with Ellie, but now he's going to be going to this new school because Achilles is not going to be able to drive him to school, and the Academy for Environmental Science is closer, so he'll be able to walk every day. And that's the only reason he's really changing. He's already gotten his welcome letter, so warm and fuzzy, from his new teacher, and on orientation day, he finds out what his new teacher is really like. It's just the same. Another announcement from Principal S. Klatt sent the parents to the auditorium for parent orientation, and after they left, Mr. Hooper came into room 117, closed the door, paused for a bit, and then said in his low voice like rolling rocks, "Listen up. I'm only going to say this once." That got our attention. I think the kid next to me almost wet his pants, which is something that if you do it in 7th grade, you never live down. It's a whole lot worse than being Toto in 3rd grade. 4 months ago, I retired from a long and honorable career in the United States Marine Corps. Does anyone know what that means?" A kid behind me said, "You couldn't hack it anymore?" This was not the right answer. Mr. Hooper waited a long time before he said anything to make sure that we knew that this was not the right answer. Then Lieutenant Colonel Hooper went back to his desk, which faced us like a small fort. He leaned over it. "And now you will know this. Starting the Tuesday after Labor Day, I will be the major adult force in your life other than your parents. Not a major adult force, the major adult force. Predictably," and here Lieutenant Colonel Hooper looked at Henry Sugimoto, "this will be a burden that will keep some of you awake long into coming nights. Does the potential of a sleepless night for you bother me? No, it does not. Will that potential bother some of you? I expect it will. Do I care that it will bother some of you? No, I do not." And he sat down behind Fort's desk. "Any questions?" he said. No one had any questions. The kid next to me, who had almost wet his pants, was squirming. "Dismissed!" And that was the end of my summer. There, I'm glad I got that all out of the way. Sounds like it's going to be a real interesting year at the Academy. Hercules is not optimistic. Now, the story is about the labors of Hercules Beal. Let's find out about that next. About the first Friday after school starts, Lieutenant Colonel Hooper has an assignment for them, a year-long assignment. "So," said Lieutenant Colonel Hooper, "I'm about to send you out on a year-long mission, a classical mythology application project. The goal is to learn something about yourselves through studying the classical myths. They aren't just bedtime stories, and despite the look on Beal's face when we covered the Pegasus story, they aren't just weird stories from the past. They are stories meant to convey something about the world and your place in it. In an academy studying environmental sciences, that seems to me to be pretty important, and therefore a worthy mission. Wouldn't you say so, Sugimoto? Henry nodded his head. Lieutenant Colonel Hopfer stood and walked around to the other side of Fort Desk. You're not kids anymore, he said, and the world around you is vast and complicated, and it sure isn't going to wait for you to grow up. It's time to think seriously about your place in it. Wouldn't you say so, Malcolm? Ty Malcolm nodded his head. Lieutenant Colonel Hopfer pulled a yellow pad from a lower drawer of Fort Desk. I'm going to give you your assignments now. I'll formalize these with written orders next week. You have 8 months to complete them. You will be providing me with short but regular reflections on the contents of your project. These will be 150 words in length. They will be handwritten or typed, but they must be turned in on a sheet of paper that was made from a real tree. Yes, I am aware of the environmental implications. I'll risk the future of the planet on this. So, Lieutenant Colonel Hopfer gives everyone their assignments, and then he turns to Hercules. And so to the classically named Hercules Beal, he said, walking over to me. I think your assignment is almost predestined. You will remember that earlier this week I referenced the 12 labors of the famed Hercules? I nodded. You will consider each of those 12 labors as they might be performed today. In your 150-word reflections, you will then report on your performance of these labors, or your recognition of the relevance of these labors during some event that you have experienced, chronicling your growing awareness of the meaning of the stories and how they connect to your own life. What do you mean performance? I said. Exactly what the word means. An act in which you perform, do, make, happen, execute, accomplish. And recognition of the relevance? The strangeness of these myths is how often they subtly enact themselves in our lives, but we notice them only when we're watching closely, as I hope you will be, because with watching will come recognition, and with recognition, understanding of their relevance. I think you might want to consult Anton's classical dictionary to begin with. You'll find a copy in the Truro Public Library. Wait a minute, all 12? All 12. Isn't one of those labors going down to hell? There and back, said Lieutenant Colonel Hopfer. As I indicated to Ms. de la Peña, it's a tough world, Beal. A moment passed, almost as if Lieutenant Colonel Hopfer had to think about something, and then he did the strangest thing he'd done since the moment I'd walked into the Cape Cod Academy for Environmental Sciences and room 117. He leaned down over me and whispered so quietly that no one else could hear. But I think you already know that. I looked at him. Not that I care, said Lieutenant Colonel Hopfer. How in the world is Hercules Beal, a modern-day boy, going to perform the 12 labors of Hercules from classical mythology? I mean, all of them have to do with some type of mythological beast almost. There's the Nemean lion, the Hydra, the Cretan bull, and Cerberus, the 3-headed dog that guards the gates to the underworld. How is that going to be part of his everyday life and teach him more about his life and the world around him? Well, let's find out how one of the labors happens with the Nemean lion, the first labor of Hercules. To start out with, Hercules does a little research. He goes to the library and finds that book that Lieutenant Colonel Hopfer told him about. After Hercules' whole family is killed, does that remind you of anybody? He becomes a secret to himself, which I think means he doesn't know what the heck to do next. So he goes to consult the Oracle of Apollo to get over his sadness, like that's going to help, and the Oracle tells him that he has to complete 12 great labors that the gods will demand through King Eurystheus of Mycenae. So Hercules heads to Mycenae, and on the way the gods give him gifts to help him with the labors. A bow and arrows from Apollo, a sword from Hermes, horses from Poseidon, a robe from Athena, a golden breastplate from Hephaestus. But you know what? They're all kind of stupid gifts that don't do anything, so he cuts himself a club from the Nemean woods and puts that over his shoulder. When he gets to the court, Eurystheus is pretty scared, mostly because of the club probably, and the king decides to give Hercules the most impossible labors he can imagine, which I guess is what the gods wanted him to do. For the first, Hercules has to capture the Nemean lion, which is a big deal since no one has ever been able to capture him, and he can't be wounded with arrows or swords. So Hercules traps the lion in his den and chokes him to death, and then he skins him and wears his hide. That hide is still pretty terrifying, and when Hercules returns to the court, Eurystheus is so frightened of the Nemean lion's skin that he builds himself a chamber of brass to hide in, and he tells Hercules that he can never again pass the gates of Mycenae without his permission. Except that Hercules decides to ignore that. I guess when you have a club and the skin of a Nemean lion roaring over your shoulder, you can pretty much do what you want. Except if the point of all this was to heal Hercules' sadness over losing his family, even a club and the skin of the Nemean lion can't do a single stupid thing. For days, Hercules looks around trying to find something that's like a Nemean lion, something he can defeat, but nothing. Ellie says, something will show up, something always does. You just wait for the right moment, and when you recognize it, everything falls into place. Well, it does a couple days later. And when I got home, I opened the door and let Mindy out to do what good dogs do. Tell you that coming home is the best thing that ever happened in the whole universe. Hercules decides to take a walk around the block with Mindy. Still no Nemean lion and no right something, until Mindy saw the cat standing in front of Elias and Elena's house. These are houses on the property that belonged to their family for generations. Standing in front of the house like she owned it. An ugly cat. A really, really ugly cat. A really, really ugly cat that had a scar slashed across her face and was missing an eye and part of her tail and probably some other stuff. Mindy is a lot faster than a cat, but the cat was so ugly that she was kind of startling. And during that epic sprint that followed, every so often the cat would stop for a moment and show herself. And Mindy would go into a full retreat because that's what an ugly cat will do to a good dog. And then the cat would turn and claw away, and Mindy would be all in. And that's how they sprinted past Ellie's sugar maple and through the neighborhood and past the first summer house and onto the porch of the second summer house. These are still open summer houses for vacationers in their neighborhood. And when I caught up, standing on the porch of the second summer house, I am not making this up, there were 11 more ugly cats along with the first ugly cat, freezing Mindy in his place and watching her and being ugly the way ugly cats do. Fur all matted, lips up in a sneer, chomped up tails at full mast, eyes narrow and yellow, nails sticking out like scalpels, backs high up so they can spring at you, all that. I could see these cats, these ugly cats, starting to advance toward Mindy like they were alien creatures from some planet that orbited a dark red sun, slowly advancing. I wasn't sure I was going to reach Mindy in time. And then Mr. Neal, crabby Mr. Neal next door, appeared from around the side of the summer house, armed with a spurting hose. "Ah!" he shouted and let loose with the water. Every one of the cats jumped through the broken porch window and into the summer house, leaving the pieces of fur and other fleshy stuff on the jagged pane. The horrible noise they made was like what you'd imagine ugly cats would make. Horrible. Mr. Neal sprayed the water against the broken window panes, then turned off the hose. Mindy began to wag her tail. If I'd had a tail, I might have wagged mine. "Those cats are like demons," Mr. Neal said. "They just hunt to kill." I took hold of Mindy's collar. "You ever wonder why there are hardly any birds around here anymore? Because of those cats. They kill them just to kill them. Imagine what would have happened if they'd sunk their claws into your dog." "Thank you," I said. He turned and walked back toward his house, wrapping the hose around his arm as he went. But Mindy and I walked around the summer house, me because I wanted to see how many places the cats were getting in, and Mindy because she was afraid to leave me, I think. And you know what? Those demon cats followed from window to window, watching with arched backs and crooked faces and broken claws. They hissed whenever I looked at them, except for the one-eyed cat who just watched like she wanted something. She probably wanted to eat me. I found two places they were getting in, the broken window on the front porch and a corner in the back where they dragged away some of the clapboard siding. I was kneeling down to look inside when Ellie called. "Did you find what you need to do for the first labor yet?" she said. I stood up and looked at the cats being ugly in the windows. I think I found the right something, I said. So Hercules now knows what he needs to do to defeat the Nemean Lion, his first labor. But he's going to have to get some reinforcements, he thinks. He comes up with a plan. He gets Henry Sugimoto, Ellie, and Ty Malcolm. And he gets some boards and nails. The plan is to shoo all the cats out of the summer house and then board it up so they can't come back in. Let's see what happens. Okay, said Ellie. Henry, can you film all this so that Hercules can prove to Lieutenant Colonel Hooper that he caught the Nemean lions? Good idea, I said. Henry whipped out his phone. Okay, he said, ready. First, I shone my flashlight through the broken window into the creepy dark room. No ugly cats. We left the crate and the plywood on the front porch. Then we went back around and nailed the clapboards against the frame. Ellie held the boards and I nailed. Henry's job was to film. Ty's job was to look nervous. Then we went around back to the front porch and I pushed up on the window frame, but nothing gave. I figured it was locked, so I reached through one of the broken panes up to my elbow, not forgetting that I was exposing that major artery that runs on the inside of your arm to the very sharp glass, and I felt around toward the lock. Okay, so I get that there are some people in the world who like cats. Ellie likes cats. Probably Gandhi liked cats. And maybe Mother Teresa put out milk for them. Maybe the Dalai Lama likes to hold cats in his lap. But here's why I do not like cats. You can never see them coming. Which I didn't when I reached in and exposed that major artery. Do you need me to tear up one of the burlap sacks? Asked Ellie when I pulled my arm back out. Geez, said Henry, shining his flashlight on the 5 long and deep kind of jagged scratches that ran from my wrist to my elbow. There's so much blood. Do you think we should go to the emergency room now? Ty, by the way, had dropped the burlap sacks on the ground and was gone. No, I said, we're going to get this done. Henry, did you catch that? What? Me reaching in. Did you catch that on film? No, I'll get it this time. Reach in again. Reach in again? Yeah, this time I'll get the blood. Maybe Ellie should scream just when you... I'm not going to scream, said Ellie, and she shone her light through the broken window and into the house. We all looked in. I can't even tell you how many pairs of eyes were glinting back at us, not to mention the biggest eye that was looking back all by itself. They were all green and yellow. They were in thin slits except for the biggest one, which was wide open. None of them blinked. I'm not going in there, said Henry. You go in. You're the smallest. What's that supposed to mean? It means you can climb through the window, the easiest, and... Listen, I said, have you seen my brother? He's like 7 feet tall, and he had this growth spurt at... I'll go around the back and tap on one of the windows, said Ellie. Then all the cats will come to me, and you two can climb in. She started to head around the house and then looked back. At least, that might happen, she said. Oh boy, oh boy. We didn't exactly hear Ellie tap on the window. The wind was too high for that, but we did see a lot of the gleaming eyes suddenly leave. Except one. And then that one slowly closed. They're all gone, whispered Henry. Not the cat with one eye. Henry shone the flashlight around. I think it's gone, he said. I shook my head. Are you going in or not? Asked Henry. It was a good question. I'll come in right after you, said Henry. I nodded. Unless they start to eat you. I looked at him. Only kidding, he said, but I wasn't sure he was. I shone my flashlight in again. No eyes or eye. So I wrapped a burlap sack around my bloody arm, bashed in the rest of the window panes, checked for any more jagged glass, shone the flashlight in one more time, no eyes or eye, found the lock, pulled up the window and climbed in. Inside, I couldn't hear anything because of the crashing waves below and the crashing thunder above. Henry shone his flashlight in, and then he slowly climbed through too. Oh, this smell is disgusting. He leveled his phone and filmed. Ellie had come back around to the front, and she handed us the rest of the burlap sacks, then climbed in herself. Do you think giving an assignment that means you have to smell a smell like this is even legal? She said. I'm pretty sure Lieutenant Colonel Hooper left behind what's legal and what isn't legal a long time ago, said Henry. We waved our flashlights slowly across the dark living room and its overturned broken chairs as Henry filmed. Nothing. We went through an empty dining room, through a kitchen and its 3 broken plates on the counter, and into the bathroom with its... Never mind. We went upstairs, from one bedroom to the next. Rusted bed springs, a shattered mirror, torn curtains, a dresser missing all its drawers, a moldy copy of a book on the floor. Henry still filming. Nothing. Not an ugly cat in sight. "Do you think they got out some other way?" said Henry. Ellie shook her head. "They're here," she said. "I can sense them." Henry looked at me. "Okay," he said slowly. "That's pretty creepy." He kept filming. Back down to the living room, flashlights looking all around, in the corners, around into the hall, in a closet, even though the door was closed. Nothing. Then a huge bolt of lightning lit everything up, and a thunder crash dropped on top of the second summer house as if all of Truro had fallen on us. But it wasn't the crash that made me want to run. It was what the lightning showed. A section of the living room ceiling missing. Glinting eyes perched all around the hole, hating us. Cats with their nails on the edge of the remaining plaster. Mouths drawn back to sharp incisors, claws extending like sharp hypodermics. A hiss, then 100 more hisses. One of the cats starting to leap. All of that happened in a single flash of lightning. Henry screamed, but he kept on filming. I think I might have screamed too. I know Ellie screamed the loudest. I think, way off in the distance, Ty was screaming. Then the sound of ugly cat bodies leaping from the ceiling and landing on the floor all around us. Hissing, hissing, hissing. Closer, closer, closer. A lot more than a dozen. Hissing, hissing, slithering closer, closer, closer. Henry dropping his phone, then grabbing Ellie's flashlight and shining it all around to find it. And everywhere the light touched, there was an ugly cat, hissing. Then the front door being jerked open and Henry running out into the dark and the flashlight as another lightning strike lit us up. And then Ellie running out into the dark. I think she was still screaming, but it might have been Henry. And then quick flashes of lightning showing all the cats running after them, claws sticking out like iron needles. And not to complain, but most of them stopped, just for a second, to take a clawing swat at my legs. I was wearing shorts. More thunder, more crashing of the waves. I shone my flashlight down at my legs. Maybe some people would be distracted by a whole lot of blood dripping down parts of their bodies, but I wasn't going to be. You can't be distracted when you're trying to do one of Hercules' 12 labors. I ran outside. I quickly got the sheet of plywood on the front porch and nailed it to the window frame. Then I went back inside and closed the door behind me. You have to admit, that was pretty brave. I walked through the kitchen, the dining room, and the bathroom just to be sure that all the cats were gone as the Nemean lion. They were. Hercules' first labor was finished. I headed toward the front door as the lightning storm outside was going berserko and scattering bright streaks into the house. And then a thud, as if something had jumped down beside me. I turned. My legs were tingling, probably from blood loss. I angled my flashlight toward the floor and toward the ugly cat, the one I had seen first, the cat with one eye. She stared at me, eye down to a slit, her ugly face twisted in a murderous grin, like she wanted to lick the blood off my arm and my legs before she killed me. Green light shone out of her awful eye. One half-torn ear hung down like it was dead. A wide red scar slanted across the left side of her face where the fur would never grow back. Her ripped-up lips seemed snarled over yellow teeth, some missing, the rest sharp. And then, the cat sat down, held her paw up to her face to lick it, put paws down, walked over to me, stroked slowly around my bleeding legs, and purred. Purred. She really did. She purred. I stood still for a long time because this really was an ugly cat, and she had really big long claws, and a scar, for heaven's sakes, and scar ridges all over her back. Probably leprosy, too. But she kept purring, and she rubbed herself against my legs. With the blood on her face, ugly cat started to look sort of like a pirate cat, sort of. "Don't you want to run?" I said. Pirate cat sat down and began to lick her paw again. And Pirate Cat was covered in this glowing silver light, covered from her glowing whiskers and across her glowing back to her glowing silvery tail, crooked in the middle and missing at the end. She looked up at the moon, and her eye was full and open. She turned back to me, paused, and then lifted her front feet onto my bloody knee. I picked her up and held her close to my chest, and she looked at me as if she knew who I was, and somewhere down deep inside her, she purred and purred and purred. And you know what? Somewhere down deep inside me, something got a little looser. I don't even know how to say it. Something got looser. It just did. So that's Hercules' first labor, the Nemean lion, and there are many more to come. Lieutenant Colonel Hupfer says that the goal of this project is to learn something about yourselves through studying the classical myths. Their stories meant to convey something about the world and about your place in it. I think Hercules is going to learn a lot. To find out what he does learn, take a look at The Labors of Hercules Beal by Gary D. Schmidt. This has been Chapter Book Storytime. Thanks for joining me. See you next time. Goodbye.